Hear NFL legends, players, coaches, and media members from around the country sharing their insights and stories with us year-round. Here on Thursday night, Tailgate.
All right, now back with us and making his sixth appearance with us here on TNT is Chris Miller. Let me remind you about Chris's background. He's from Pomona, California, which is in Los Angeles County. Played his high school football at Eugene Sheldon High in Eugene, Oregon, and went on to play his college ball at the University of Oregon, where he remains sixth all-time in passing yards and eighth in touchdown passes. He was a first-round draft pick, the 13th overall selection in 1987 by the Atlanta Falcons. Played in the NFL from 87 to 99 for the Falcons, Rams, and Broncos. He was named to the Pro Bowl in 1991 when he threw for over 3,100 yards and 26 touchdowns, leading the Falcons to their first playoff appearance in nearly a decade. Over the course of his career, he threw for 19,320 yards and 123 touchdowns. In 1999, he was inducted into the University of Oregon Athletics Hall of Fame, and in 2005, he was inducted into the State of Oregon Sports Hall of Fame. And we're thrilled he is back with us again tonight here on Thursday Night Tailgate. Hey, Chris and Bob, thanks for coming back on the show.
Hi, Chris. How you doing, guys? Thanks for having me. I enjoyed the last 5 minutes of Gus's interview. That was awesome.
We appreciate it. So, Chris, we want to start off tonight by getting your draft day memories. What were people telling you? You know, those folks around you, whether it was coaches, agents, other people around you, that who was interested in you and where you might end up going in the draft.
Well, it was a pretty interesting time back then. I'll never forget. Mike Holmgren's retired now, but he came up. He was with the 49ers, and he came up and worked me out at Autzen Stadium. And one of my good friends went out and caught for me. And when we were done, he slipped us a $50 bill, and he says, "Hey, go have a few beers on me." So it was, it was interesting back in the day, just kind of a different dynamic. But I thought I'd go somewhere between. I think San Diego picked at 5, and the Raiders were at 15. And so we kind of thought we'd go somewhere maybe in that gap. I ended up going the 13th pick in the first round to Atlanta. So, but it was an interesting time and not near as strenuous or as involved as it is now with the guys preparing for the draft. They're just kind of nonstop once their season's over, especially the projected first round quarterbacks and such.
And Chris, you became the Falcons starting quarterback in your second season. So did sitting a year and watching Scott Campbell help you become more prepared for the following year? Or would it have been more helpful for you just to get thrown right into the fire and learn as you played?
Well, it was interesting, Chris and Bob, that when I was drafted in 87, that was a strike year. So there were probably about 13 or 14 of us first round draft picks that didn't sign till the Halloween time. So, we went there during the off season, learned a little bit of football in April, in May after the draft, and then we kind of stayed away from the facility because, the draft was looming and that was going on, and there were scab players who crossed the picket lines, and obviously as a rookie quarterback or a rookie player, you didn't want to break that precedent and go in and cross the picket line to play. So, so we didn't sign till Halloween night. I think when I got there, the Falcons were 2-7. I watched a little bit. Scott Campbell was there and Turk Schonert, and then I ended up playing in the second half of the Rams game, which was the third to last game of the year. Started against the 49ers. I think they were about 12-2 at the time, or 11-2. They won the Super Bowl that year, and then our last game against Detroit. So I got my feet wet a little bit, but really, I consider 88 as my first year, first full season.
And Chris, when you look back at the roster, right, that the Falcons had, you had Scott Campbell, Eric Kramer, David Archer as quarterbacks already on that roster. What was it like for you coming in? Because you got to believe those guys knew, since you were a first-round pick, it was only a matter of time until you became the starter.
Yeah, I think when I got drafted, it was Scott Campbell and David Archer, and I went in when I got drafted, and I met Dave, and he's a good dude. We still keep in touch, and Scott Campbell came out to my first wedding, or it was a part of that, so he was a good friend. And in the year prior, Atlanta went 7-8-1, and it was like they were making some headway. The year I was drafted in '87, I think they had only had 3 winning seasons in 23 years at that point in time. So the organization wasn't a real strong one. The 5 Smiths kind of did the draft. They didn't have a general manager, so they were kind of behind the times in terms of, how some of the top programs operated in the NFL. So, but obviously when those guys are there and they're the incumbent starter and you bring in a number 1 draft pick, they're doing that with the intention of playing the guy. And then Marion Campbell came in and was our new head coach. And, so I took over in 88 and started playing and was the guy. And then I think Dave left and went and played, I believe, in Canada a little bit and, played in Sacramento. And then Scott Campbell was there. Turk Schonert was there. And Eric Kramer actually was the scab quarterback on that 87 team, crossed the picket line. And then I think he ended up going up to Detroit and actually leading his team to an NFC championship game against Washington in 91. So, and he's a good buddy of mine. I still keep in touch with Eric as well.
5 questions for Chris.
Great to speak with you again, Chris. And as you know, you've listened to tonight. You listened to some of our conversation with Gus Frerotte. It occurred to me, you guys, your paths kind of overlapped a little bit, especially in the '90s. There, I was just wondering, you probably faced off against him. What are your memories of Frerotte and those Redskins teams of the '90s?
Yeah, I just always remember the Redskins were tough. I think actually that was one of our last home games that was played down in L.A. before we got moved to St. Louis in '94. And it was a good competitive game. I just remember Gus had a strong arm. Obviously remember him jamming his neck into the RFK Stadium wall there and screwing his neck up. But I tell you, I was really intrigued by the conversation, some of the cutting edge stuff they're doing with brain function, proactive means and research and programs. Obviously, I had to retire twice in the NFL due to concussion. So sounds like the company he's aligned himself with, they're doing some really, really proactive stuff. And obviously, I think, guys who play in the NFL who are starting quarterbacks or play the game, I think you have more of an appreciation and respect for them as you get older, as you get a little bit farther removed. Because while you're playing, you're in the moment and you're just kind of living and going, and you see all the guys during the off season at Dan Marino or Elway or Jim Kelly or Bernie Kosar or Boomer Esiason's golf tournaments, and but you have an appreciation for the guys more, I think, once they get away from it and turn into professionals and doing things like Gus is doing. It's pretty cool.
Hey, Chris, I saw that when you came in the league, your first offensive coordinator was Rod Dowhauer. That was a guy that spent about 14, 15 years in the league, a couple as a head coach, but mostly as an offensive coordinator. He was a San Diego State guy, so he knew about putting the ball up in the air. What are your memories of him, perceived strengths and weaknesses?
Well, Rod was great. I'm really impressed how studied you guys are. I got to tell you, you guys are very prepared on your research. So Bob and Chris, kudos to you guys. One story I got to tell you real quick about that draft, going back to it in '87. I know I'm bouncing around, but the draft was at 8:30 a.m. on the East Coast, so we had a draft party in the Stadium Club at Austin Stadium. It started at 5 a.m. On the West Coast, so it was a little bit different than the 5 p.m. kickoff, on the West Coast now with the big first round on Thursday nights and stuff. So I remember that as well. But Rod was a great, Rod was kind of a Bill Walsh descendant. He was on his tree, so we ran a lot of the Bill Walsh West Coast stuff, which, I really loved. And Rod was very detailed. He was the head coach, I think, for the Indianapolis Colts for a couple of years, and he was at Vanderbilt, and very detailed guy. We had Jimmy Ray on our staff, who was a fantastic coach. We had Jim Hannafin, who we called Chief. He was our O-line coach, and he's a legend and an icon in the game. And then we had a guy named Steve Crosby, who was our running back coach. So, we had quite a staff. It took a little while to kind of put a good roster together where we made the playoffs a couple of years in a row. But, I learned a lot of football from those guys and still kind of utilize some of their concepts and things that I've learned, in coaching my high school kids now.
Chris, want to get your thoughts on your alma mater, Oregon. They finished 7-6 last season with Justin Herbert as quarterback. I'm still lobbying for them to pronounce it Abear, but we'll work on that. He's headed into his junior year. But your expectations for Oregon next season and Herbert as well?
Well, I think I told you guys before, his dad, Mark, was my high school wide receiver and free safety. So, they've got some really good bloodlines in their family. And actually, Mark's younger son, Patrick, just committed to Oregon. He's about a 6'5", 235-pound tight end, defensive end. And so they'll have two A-Bears / Herberts at Oregon coming up here soon. But, I think last year they were rolling, and then Justin got hurt. He broke his collarbone, kind of diving through a couple defenders, kind of like the Philadelphia quarterback Carson Wentz when he injured his knee, kind of a similar type play, and Justin broke his collarbone, and then they really struggled at quarterback play. I think they probably would have been a 10-win team last year if Justin would have stayed healthy. So, I've really been impressed. I've got to know Mario Cristobal well and some of the other coaches there, and they're resilient, relentless recruiters, and, the facilities there are phenomenal. I think they're starting to get that, Cristobal was O-line coach for Nick Saban at Alabama for 4 years, so they're trying to get some of that mentality, some downhill run game, some physicality, some toughness at the point on both sides of the ball. So, I think they're accomplishing that, and I expect them to be in the hunt with Stanford and Washington, probably in the Pac-12 North. But if Justin stays healthy, I think we'll have a chance to be very successful. And he'll have a chance to be probably a top 5 or top 10 draft pick in the first round, in next year's draft.
And Chris, wanted to get your thoughts on the Falcons offense. Last season wasn't quite as good as it was in 2016 when Kyle Shanahan was the offensive coordinator. He obviously left and went to San Francisco. Steve Sarkisian comes in and takes over as the offensive coordinator last season. How tough is that? When you look at Matt Ryan's performance, not as good last year as it was in 16, and like I said, the overall offense the same. How tough is that when one coordinator leaves, another coordinator comes in for the starting quarterback and the rest of the offense to grasp that? Is that something you could look to or point to that say, you know what, hey, they might have taken a step back next year. Maybe they needed a year and a new offense to get things together, and maybe Ryan can come back and have a strong season this year?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's no doubt. It's like learning a different language. You go from maybe learning Chinese to French, when you have a year, a new playbook the following year. And they had such an incredible, I think that, as a quarterback and a coordinator now, really the quarterback pretty much runs the offensive meetings. He'll run the meetings and go through the reads, and he'll coach off the film. And I'm sure Kyle had a lot of input in it as well. But, the Peyton Mannings and the Tom Bradys and those guys, I think they basically run the whole show. They're making $20, $25, $30 million and it's their neck on the line. So, Kyle is a tremendous football mind. You saw the success he had last year when he brought in Jimmy Garoppolo, and they kind of got their, they lost some really close competitive games and then reeled off the last 6. So I look for them to be really good this year. But, and then Steve Sarkisian is plenty capable, but I think you could see early in the season last year through mid-season, they were trying to find their stride. They were trying to kind of gain an identity and learn the new system, and Matt was probably trying to get a feel, because you can do it all in the off-season and the summer, but you're limited with all those relaxed OTAs now and off-season training. But, Kyle Shanahan and Matt had a great rapport, and Matt Ryan was the MVP of the league, and if they don't get that strip sack, strip fumble, and maybe handle the fourth quarter better, they're the world champion. So, anytime you bring a new coordinator in, and Kyle's at the top of that, list of coordinators, it takes a while, but I think they'll probably, start off kind of where they ended last year. Matt was playing better, and they should get off to a much better start in 2018, I would anticipate.
Bob, one more for Chris.
Yeah, Chris, you had mentioned coaching, and tell us more about that, what you're doing, the age categories, et cetera, and is that something that you probably would like to do maybe at another level someday?
Yeah, great question, Bob. I'll be at Westland High School up in Portland, Oregon, or Westland, Oregon. In my 5th year as the head coach up there, we won a state championship. We got to another one and lost a close game. And the last 4 years, we've been 44-8 the last 4 years. So we built a real good program, and I'm actually taking online classes right now. I left Oregon a year early when I came out in 1987, so I'll be a 52-year-old graduate this December 14th, and I aspire to, go after an FCS job, a D1 AA job or a D2 head job, and kind of build my own program, put my own staff together, kind of put my own stamp on it, and not necessarily have to recruit the entire country and live in airports and do all those things, still enjoy some quality of life. So that's kind of what I'm looking toward. I do a lot of private training, and I coach some football university camps. So I'll be coaching another one this Saturday up in Seattle, and so I coach a bunch of high school quarterbacks and kind of get them ready for their seasons and see how many we can help get earn scholarships. But it's all around football, and I love it and enjoy it thoroughly, and I've been very blessed to be a part of this great game.
So, Chris, for folks that are now intrigued about the camps that you're doing and the coaching that you're doing, how can they reach out to you? How can they find out more information and get in touch with you?
Well, the football university camps, they can go to footballuniversity.org or fbu.org. Again, footballuniversity.org. The camps are coached by former NFL players. For example, I coached our last camp down in the Bay Area last weekend. Doug Cosby was there, former NFL tight end. Ricky Hunley, and so there's been some really talented former players that coach these camps. The technique and the lessons the kids learn are awesome. They're 2 days of aggressive coaching and training. They're kind of like NFL mini camps. So again, that's footballuniversity.org. And then I'm not a big social media guy, but it's Chris Miller QB on Twitter. Chris Miller QB on Twitter. If anyone, actually, a few folks have reached out and they've signed up for these FU camps. So that's it.
Chris, thank you so much for taking time out of your night to come back and be a part of the show. You're fantastic. We hope you'll come back and share more of your insights and stories with us again here real soon. We really enjoy every time we get to spend with you.
An honor, Chris.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris and Bob. Again, you guys do a great job. You're very well prepared and thoroughly impressed. So I appreciate you having me on, and continued success.
Anytime.
Thanks, Chris. All the best to you and your family. We'll catch up soon.
Sounds good. Take care, boys.
That is former Pro Bowl quarterback Chris Miller. And again, it's footballuniversity.org or fbu.org, and he's doing great things. And Bob, if Chris Miller's your coach, particularly if he's your quarterback coach, you know you're going to learn a lot and go someplace.
That's a great point, Chris. Such a cerebral guy, and my goodness, you could get an idea why he was such a good quarterback. But taking all that information and education and doing what he does now for our younger kids, it's great, and it's a tremendous honor to speak with him. He's slowly becoming one of our favorite guests.
Yes, he is. And speaking of one of our favorite guests, we've got Bo Bach hanging on the line. We're going to get to Bo on the other side of this quick station break.